What would you do if you were in the same circumstances with the characters in the following stories? We would very love to know, and you could share it below under the comment sections. Now, let the stories unfold.
I'll never forget the exact moment Killian Ashford first saw me, truly saw me, and I knew with absolute certainty that my life would never be the same. It was a sweltering August afternoon when I slipped away to the hidden creek behind the estate, seeking refuge from both the oppressive heat and the suffocating weight of being invisible in my own sister's house, never imagining that this stolen moment of freedom would seal my fate in ways I couldn't begin to comprehend. The cool water against my overheated skin felt like benediction, like the first real breath I'd taken in months. But when I lifted my gaze and found those storm-gray eyes watching me from the bank with an intensity that seemed to strip away every defense I'd ever built, I understood in that electric instant that invisibility had been my only protection, and I'd just lost it to the most dangerous man I'd ever encountered, the man who was engaged to marry my sister in exactly 12 weeks. My name is Callista Monroe, though in the Ashford estate most people simply called me Vivian's sister, or sometimes they didn't call me anything at all because I'd perfected the art of being so utterly unremarkable that I barely registered in their awareness. I'd been living in the shadows of this sprawling mansion in the Catskills for 9 months. 9 months since my sister Vivian had gotten engaged to the heir of the Ashford Empire and brought me along like an afterthought, a piece of luggage she couldn't quite leave behind but had no real use for either. We had no other family. Our parents had died in a boating accident when I was 16, and Vivian was already 24, carving out her place in New York society with a ruthlessness I both admired and feared. She'd become my legal guardian, and the person who never let me forget exactly how much I owed her for that burden. Vivian was everything I wasn't. Stunning with her golden hair and emerald eyes, charismatic in a way that drew people like moths to flame, clever enough to have captured the attention of the most eligible bachelor on the eastern seaboard. I was just the younger sister, the one who arranged flowers for parties I wasn't important enough to attend, the one who managed household details while staying carefully out of sight, grateful to have a roof over my head and a purpose, however small. But there in that creek, for the first time in my entire 24 years, someone looked at me as if I were the only person in the world who mattered. Killian didn't speak that first day. He simply stood there on the mossy bank in his charcoal suit that seemed absurdly formal in the wild beauty of the forest, watching me with an expression I couldn't decipher, something between reverence and hunger and something else I didn't dare name. I should have covered myself, should have screamed, should have done anything except remain frozen in the water up to my shoulders, staring back at him with my heart pounding so violently I was certain he could hear it even from that distance. There was something in his gaze, something that felt like recognition, even though we'd barely exchanged more than a dozen words in all the months I'd lived under his roof. He looked at me as if he'd been searching for something his entire life, and had just found it in the most unexpected place. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, he turned and walked away without a single word, disappearing into the trees like a ghost, leaving me trembling in the water with the sudden, terrifying knowledge that everything had just changed. That night at dinner was torture. Vivian held court as always, discussing wedding preparations with an enthusiasm that bordered on manic, talking about the guest list that had swelled to over 400 people, about her custom Vera Wang gown being created in Milan, about the 12-tier cake and the vintage champagne they'd be serving. I sat at my usual place at the far end of the massive dining table, pushing food around my plate while trying to make myself even smaller than usual, hyper-aware of every movement Killian made. When I finally dared to glance up, I found him staring at me with that same devastating intensity from the creek, and something low in my belly tightened with a sensation I'd never experienced before. Vivian didn't notice, too absorbed in her own monologue to see the way the air between her fiancé and her sister had suddenly become charged with electricity. But I felt the shift in the atmosphere like the pressure change before a storm, and I knew with bone-deep certainty that nothing would ever be simple again. The days that followed were an exquisite form of torture. Killian began seeking me out in ways that were subtle at first, appearing in whatever room I happened to occupy as if by coincidence. The conservatory where I tended Vivian's prized orchids, the library where I catalogued books that no one else seemed to read, the rose garden where I spent early mornings cutting blooms before the heat became unbearable. He never said much, just watched, and every glance felt like a physical touch. I knew I should avoid him, knew this was dangerous in ways I couldn't fully articulate even to myself, but after spending so many years being invisible, the intoxication of being seen, truly seen, was like a drug I couldn't resist no matter how hard I tried. It was Killian who broke the silence first, really spoke to me, on a rain-soaked Thursday afternoon when I'd taken refuge in the library. The house was unusually quiet. Vivian had gone to the city for yet another fitting, and most of the staff were occupied with their duties in other wings of the massive estate. I stood at the tall windows watching rain cascade down the glass in rivulets, lost in thought, when I heard his voice behind me. Callista. The way he said my name made something inside me shatter and reform simultaneously. Not Vivian's sister, not a dismissive nickname, but my actual name, spoken like a prayer or a confession. I turned slowly, my breath catching when I realized how close he was. Close enough that I could see the silver threading through the gray of his eyes. Close enough to catch the scent of his cologne mixed with something uniquely masculine and devastating. "You shouldn't be here," I whispered, though I wasn't entirely sure whether I meant in this room or in my life or in my thoughts that had become dangerously consumed with him. "I know," he replied, but he didn't move away. "I shouldn't be thinking about you every waking moment. I shouldn't have dreamed about you every single night since I saw you at the creek. I shouldn't want to touch you so badly that my hands literally ache from keeping them to myself." He paused, and his voice dropped even lower, becoming almost rough. "But here I am anyway." My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. No one had ever spoken to me like this. No one had ever looked at me as if I were precious, necessary, worth wanting. My entire life had been a study in being overlooked, in being the burden my sister bore with barely concealed resentment, in being grateful for whatever scraps of attention came my way. And now this man, this powerful, dangerous man, who could have anyone, who was engaged to my beautiful, perfect sister, was telling me he couldn't stop thinking about me. "You're going to marry Vivian," I said, forcing myself to remember reality, even as my traitorous body swayed toward him. "In 11 weeks. That was the plan," he agreed, and something dark and conflicted crossed his face. An arrangement that made sense for everyone involved. I'd get a beautiful wife from an established family. She'd get access to the Ashford fortune and connections. Clean, simple, mutually beneficial. He took a step closer, then another, until I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Until I saw you in that creek and my entire world shifted on its axis." "I'm nobody," I whispered, echoing the words Vivian had drilled into me for years. "I'm not important, not special, not worth—" "Don't." The command in his voice was sharp enough to cut. "Don't ever say that again. Who made you believe you were nothing?" I didn't answer, but the silence spoke volumes. His jaw clenched, anger flashing in those storm-gray eyes. But I knew somehow that it wasn't directed at me. "May I touch you?" he asked. And that question, that moment of asking permission when he clearly had the power to simply take, fundamentally changed something in my understanding of who this man was. I nodded, unable to form words, and his hands finally touched my face, cradling it with a gentleness that seemed at odds with everything I knew about Killian Ashford, the ruthless heir to an empire built on both legitimate business and carefully concealed criminal enterprises. "You're everything," he said simply, "and I'm going to spend however long it takes proving that to you." I should have stopped him when he leaned in. Should have thought about Vivian, about consequences, about the impossibility of this situation. But when his lips met mine, tentative at first, and then with increasing urgency, every rational thought evaporated. This was my first real kiss, my first moment of being chosen rather than tolerated, and I clung to him as if he were both salvation and damnation, which perhaps he was. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathing hard, reality crashed over me like ice water. I can't do this, I said, stepping back on shaking legs. I can't be the other woman, can't betray my sister like this, no matter what she's done or said to me. I'm not asking you to be the other woman, Killian said, and there was something fierce and final in his voice. I'm asking you to be the only woman, the only one who matters. Before I could process what he meant, we heard footsteps in the hallway. Moved away from him quickly, straightening my dress with trembling hands. By the time the housekeeper entered to build up the fire, we were standing at opposite ends of the room, him examining a book, and me staring out the window, the picture of innocent propriety. But I could feel the weight of his gaze on my back, and I knew that nothing between us would ever be innocent again. The weeks that followed were the most intense and confusing of my life. Killian began pulling away from Vivian in ways both subtle and overt. He canceled dinners, postponed decisions about the wedding, became cold and distant when she tried to be affectionate. I watched it all from my position in the shadows, my heart torn between hope and horror. Vivian, who was used to being adored by every man she encountered, began to spiral. She became paranoid, suspicious, cruel in ways that were shocking even for her. She was convinced there was another woman, of course, but she never imagined it could be me. How could it be? I was invisible, insignificant, nothing compared to her golden perfection. Killian and I found stolen moments in hidden corners of the vast estate. The greenhouse at midnight, when the rest of the house slept. The library before dawn, when darkness still cloaked the world. The old stables that hadn't been used in years, where dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight. He told me about his life in those secret meetings, about inheriting his father's empire at 25 and spending the last 8 years building something more legitimate while maintaining the power and fear that came from darker sources. He spoke of loneliness, of being surrounded by people who wanted something from him, power or protection or money, but never seeing him as simply a man. "Except you," he would say, holding my hand as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "You look at me, and don't see the Ashford heir, don't see the fortune, don't see the reputation. You just see me." And it was true. When I looked at him, I saw the man who secretly read philosophy, who had cried at his mother's funeral when he was 13 and never allowed himself to cry again, who was ruthless in business but gentle with animals and kind to people most of society overlooked. I saw him, really saw him, and he saw me in return, and in that mutual recognition we fell in love with an inevitability that felt like gravity. But love doesn't exist in a vacuum, and the consequences of our feelings began piling up like storm clouds on the horizon. Vivian grew increasingly erratic, her beauty taking on a hard edge as paranoia consumed her. She started humiliating me more openly, in front of staff and guests alike. One evening during a dinner party with important business associates, she accidentally knocked an entire bottle of red wine onto my dress and then laughed, saying the stain was an improvement because the dress was hideous anyway, and I should be grateful for an excuse to burn it. The guests laughed uncomfortably, except for Killian, whose knuckles went white around his wine glass and whose eyes promised retribution. Later that night, he came to my room for the first time. I was sitting on my bed still wearing the wine-stained dress, crying silently because I'd long ago learned that loud crying only brought more mockery. The soft knock on my door made my heart stop. "Callista," his voice came through the wood, rough with emotion. "Please let me in." I opened the door and he stepped inside, closing it carefully behind him. His gaze swept over me, taking in the ruined dress and the tear tracks on my face, and something murderous flashed in his eyes. "This ends now," he said, his voice carrying a finality that both thrilled and terrified me. "I'm breaking the engagement tomorrow, publicly." "You can't," I protested, even as my heart leaped at the words. "The scandal, your reputation, the business agreements with her family." "To hell with all of it," he interrupted, crossing the room to me in 3 long strides. "I've spent my entire life doing what was expected, being what other people needed me to be, making choices based on strategy and optics, rather than what I actually wanted. For the first time, I'm going to choose what I want. I choose you, Callista. I'll choose you every single day for the rest of my life if you'll let me." The tears came faster now, but they were different. Not tears of humiliation, but of something dangerously close to hope. "She'll hate me," I whispered. "Vivian already resents me for existing. I can't imagine what she'll do when she finds out." "I'll protect you," Killian promised, his hands framing my face with infinite gentleness. "You'll have security, resources, everything you need. But I can't continue this charade. I can't marry her when every thought I have belongs to you." That night, he simply held me. We sat on my bed, my back against his chest, his arms wrapped around me, and for the first time in my life I felt completely safe. He talked about our future, about courting me properly, about facing down whatever scandal would come. And even though part of me knew I was being naive, that the world wouldn't be kind to our story, I let myself believe him for those few hours. But fate has a cruel sense of timing, and our secret was exposed before Killian could end the engagement on his own terms. Vivian discovered us 3 days later, before Killian had the chance to speak with her privately. He'd planned to do it over dinner, wanted to give her that dignity at least. But the universe had other plans. I was in the rose garden, my favorite sanctuary on the estate, when Killian found me. It was early morning, the dew still clinging to the petals, and I was cutting blooms for the vases throughout the house. He appeared on the stone path looking devastated and determined in equal measure, and without a word, he pulled me into his arms. "I love you," he said against my hair, the first time either of us had spoken those words aloud. "I love you, Callista. I'll love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," I whispered back, and saying it out loud felt like stepping off a cliff, terrifying and liberating in equal measure. We kissed there among the roses, desperate and tender, and I was so lost in the sensation of being loved, of being chosen, that I didn't hear the footsteps on the gravel path until it was too late. Vivian's scream shattered the morning quiet. She stood there with 2 of her society friends, women who'd come for a breakfast meeting to discuss some charity event, their faces reflecting shock and a kind of gleeful horror at witnessing such spectacular scandal firsthand. Vivian's beautiful face was a mask of rage and betrayal that quickly twisted into something ugly. "You fucking bitch," she hissed, and before I could react, she launched herself at me, nails aimed at my face. Killian caught her, holding her back, while she screamed and clawed at him. The words that poured from her mouth were poison. She called me a whore, a snake, a manipulative little tramp who'd planned this from the beginning. She accused me of coming to her home with the intention of stealing her fiancé, of being jealous of her beauty and success, of being so pathetically desperate for attention that I'd seduced the one man who was supposed to be hers. And the worst part, the absolutely crushing part, was that some small, broken piece of me wondered if she was right. What kind of person falls in love with her sister's fiancé? What kind of woman betrays the only family she has left? "Enough!" Killian's voice cut through the chaos like a whip. He positioned himself between Vivian and me, using his body as a shield. "If you need to blame someone, blame me. This isn't Callista's fault." "Oh, I blame you," Vivian snarled, mascara running down her face in black streams. "But she's my blood. She owed me loyalty. She owed me everything? And this is how she repays me?" "She doesn't owe you anything," Killian said, his voice cold in a way I'd never heard before. And if you've treated your sister with even a fraction of the cruelty I've witnessed over these months, then she owes you less than nothing. That statement was gasoline on an already raging fire. Vivian lunged again, and Killian had to physically restrain her while she shrieked threats and obscenities. Her friend stood frozen, clearly torn between helping and capturing every juicy detail to share at their next social gathering. This scandal would fuel gossip for months, possibly years. Leave, I said quietly, finding my voice finally. I was shaking so badly I could barely stand, but I forced myself to meet Vivian's venomous gaze. Please, just leave. Go live your life, find someone else, be happy. But let me go, I'm begging you. Let you go? She laughed, a broken, harsh sound. Oh no, little sister. You don't get to walk away from this cleanly. I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what you are. I'm going to destroy whatever reputation you might have had. When I'm done with you, you'll have nowhere to go, no one who'll want you. And she kept that promise with a vengeance. The scandal exploded across New York society like a bomb. Within 24 hours, the story had spread through every social circle, every gossip column, every whispered conversation at exclusive events. In every version, I was the villain, the jealous younger sister who seduced her sibling's wealthy fiancé. It didn't matter that Killian attended every event he could, every business meeting, every social function, stating clearly that he had initiated everything, that I had resisted, that love wasn't something either of us could control. Society had decided on its narrative, and I was easier to crucify than the powerful Killian Ashford. The hate mail started arriving within days. Threats. Some women spat at me when they saw me on the street. Vivian's friends, people I barely knew, became my enemies overnight. There were moments when I wanted to disappear, to run away and let Killian live his life without the stain of my presence. But he wouldn't let me. We face this together, he insisted, holding my hand even when photographers swarmed us, even when headlines screamed our names. They'll find a new scandal eventually, but we'll endure. His family presented another challenge. His father, the previous head of the Ashford organization, was furious. Breaking an engagement like this was seen as weakness, as lack of control. Business partners questioned his judgment. There were even veiled threats from rival factions, people who saw this situation as an opportunity to challenge his leadership. Killian met every challenge head-on. He restructured alliances, reinforced his power base, demonstrated that his personal decision hadn't diminished his capability or ruthlessness in business. A man who can't choose his own destiny isn't fit to lead anyone, he declared at a crucial meeting with his organization's leadership. And a man who won't fight for what he loves doesn't deserve respect. But I could see the toll it took on him. The sleepless nights left shadows under his eyes. The constant pressure made his jaw tight with tension. There were times I hated myself for being the cause of his suffering, for bringing chaos into his carefully ordered world. One night, after a particularly brutal day where another major investor had pulled out citing moral concerns, I found him in his study, a glass of scotch in his hand, staring at the city lights below. "Let me go," I said from the doorway, my voice barely above a whisper. "This is destroying you. You're losing too much." He spun around so fast the scotch nearly sloshed over the rim of the glass. "No," he said with absolute finality. "We're not having this conversation again, Callista. But look at what it's costing you. Your business, relationships, your reputation, your family's respect. Look at what I'm gaining," he interrupted, setting down the glass and crossing to me. "A life that means something. A partner who sees me as I actually am. Real love instead of a cold transaction." His hands cupped my face with devastating gentleness. "Before you, I was building an empire but living in a prison of expectations and duty. Now I'm free, truly free, for the first time in my life. So no, I won't let you go. Not unless you look me in the eye and tell me you don't love me anymore." "You know I love you," I whispered, tears spilling over. "Then we fight," he said simply. Together. And fight we did. Slowly, painfully slowly, things began to shift. Killian continued to be implacable in business, proving that his personal choice hadn't affected his leadership capability. Some of the younger members of his organization, men who'd made their own unconventional relationship choices, began openly supporting him. Prominent journalist wrote a piece questioning why women were always blamed when men chose to break engagements, why Vivian's cruelty toward me was being ignored in favor of painting me as a seductress. And I stopped hiding. I started volunteering with a nonprofit that supported young women without family support. I used my own experience, my own pain, to connect with others who felt invisible and worthless. I found my voice, my purpose, beyond simply being the woman Killian Ashford loved. I became Callista Monroe, a person in my own right with my own value. Killian watched my transformation with something like wonder. I always knew it was there, he told me one evening as we walked through the gardens. That strength, that light. You just needed to believe in yourself enough to let it shine. The turning point came 6 months after the scandal broke. One of the most influential families in New York society, the Cavendishes, threw their support behind us. Margaret Cavendish, the family matriarch, had been watching our story unfold and apparently approved of how we'd handled ourselves. True love is rare enough without people trying to destroy it, she announced at a charity gala. Perhaps we should be celebrating courage rather than condemning it. Her endorsement changed everything. Suddenly it became acceptable, even admirable in some circles, to support us. The tide of public opinion began to turn, not completely, but enough. Vivian married a European aristocrat 7 months after our scandal, a match that appeared to be just as strategic as her engagement to Killian had been. I received an invitation to the wedding, which I took as an olive branch of sorts, though the gesture felt more about appearances than genuine reconciliation. I didn't attend, but I sent a gift with a note. I hope you find happiness, as I've found mine. She never responded, and I didn't expect her to. Some wounds cut too deep for easy healing. 1 year and 2 months. After Vivian discovered us in the rose garden, Killian asked me to marry him. It wasn't a grand gesture with photographers and crowds. It was at the creek where he'd first seen me, at dawn, with only the birds and rising sun as witnesses. I've loved you from the moment I saw you here, he said, kneeling in the damp grass with a ring that had belonged to his mother. I've loved you through every scandal, every criticism, every dark moment. I'll love you until my last breath and beyond. Callista Monroe, will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? I cried, of course. Cried because this man, this powerful, dangerous man, was offering me not just his name, but his whole heart. Cried because the girl who'd grown up feeling invisible had found someone who not only saw her, but cherished her. Cried because despite all the pain and scandal, we'd made it to this moment, stronger for having endured. Yes, I whispered through my tears. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Our wedding was intimate and beautiful, the complete opposite of the 400-person spectacle Vivian had planned. Just our closest friends and the family members who mattered. I wore a simple gown of ivory silk, carried wildflowers from the creek where our story began. When Killian saw me walking toward him, tears shone in his eyes, and I knew I'd made the right choice in fighting for this love, for us. In my vows, I spoke of being seen, of being chosen, of finding strength in love. You taught me that I'm not invisible, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. You taught me that I deserve to be loved, that I deserve to take up space in this world, that my voice matters. You gave me the courage to become who I was always meant to be. I'll love you with every part of myself, the fragile and the strong, for all our days. His vows were simpler, but no less profound. I saw you when no one else did, he said. And in seeing you, I finally saw myself. Clearly, you're my home, my peace, my purpose. I'll protect you, cherish you, and choose you every single day for the rest of my life. When we kissed as husband and wife, it was with the certainty that this love, forged in fire and scandal and pain, was stronger than any love that had been arranged or expected could ever be. Life after the wedding wasn't a fairy tale without complications. There were still people who looked at us with disapproval, still events where we weren't welcome, still whispers that followed us. But we built our own life, our own community, filled with people who valued authentic love over appearances and social climbing. I expanded my work with the nonprofit, eventually opening a shelter for young women who needed a fresh start. Killian donated generously, but I ran everything, made all the decisions, built something that was entirely mine. For the first time in my life, I wasn't in anyone's shadow. I was creating my own light. Our first child, a daughter, was born on a spring morning 2 years after our wedding. When Killian held her for the first time, I saw him cry openly for only the second time in his life. Elise, he said, naming her after his mother. Our peace, our new beginning. Watching him cradle our daughter, singing softly to her in a voice rough with emotion, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. I thought about the girl I'd been, invisible and worthless in her own estimation. I thought about the man who'd seen me, really seen me, and risked everything to have me. I thought about the pain we'd caused and endured, the scars we both carried. But looking at my husband with our daughter, in the home we'd built together against all odds, I knew every moment of pain had been worth it for this moment of perfect joy. Years passed. Elise grew into a curious, confident little girl with her father's eyes and my dark hair. We had a son, Harrison, 2 years later, who had Killian's stubborn determination and my quiet thoughtfulness. Our family became complete in ways I'd never imagined possible. I received a letter from Vivian when Harrison was born. She'd heard about it through mutual acquaintances. The letter was brief, lacking the warmth I remembered from our childhood, but also free of the venom of our last encounters. I've found my own version of happiness, she wrote. Different from what I planned, but mine nonetheless. Perhaps someday we can speak without all this history between us. But if that day never comes, I want you to know that while I can't forgive, I understand now. Sometimes love chooses us rather than the other way around. I hope you're happy, truly happy. You probably deserve it more than I ever did. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I sat with the letter for weeks, thinking about forgiveness and understanding and the possibility of grace. She'd been cruel, yes, but I'd also betrayed her in a fundamental way. We'd both been imperfect, both been hurt, both been human in our failures. Eventually, I wrote back. Not with apologies that neither of us could truly accept, but with honesty we'd never shared before. I told her about my children, about my work, about the life I'd built. I wished her genuine happiness, whatever form that took. I don't know if we'll ever be sisters again in the truest sense. Too much has happened, too many wounds have been inflicted. But maybe, with time, we can be people who wish each other well from a distance. Sometimes that has to be enough. Now, when I stand on the terrace of our home at sunset, watching Killian play with our children in the garden below, I feel gratitude so deep it almost hurts. This life, this love, this sense of belonging and purpose, it all began with a stolen moment at a creek, with a look that saw me when no one else did. I learned that being seen is a gift, but seeing yourself is power. I learned that true love isn't easy or clean, that it often requires sacrifice and courage and the willingness to face judgment. I learned that you can start invisible and become unstoppable if you find the strength within yourself and someone who believes in that strength as much as you do. My name is Callista Ashford, and this is my story. A story of being invisible and then being seen. A story of forbidden love that became eternal love. A story of finding my voice, my worth, my place in the world. It wasn't the path I expected to take, and it certainly wasn't easy. But watching my children laugh in the fading sunlight, feeling Killian's arm come around my waist as he joins me on the terrace, I know that every difficult moment led me exactly where I was meant to be. He kisses my temple, then whispers the words that have defined our story from the beginning. I see you, Callista. I've always seen you. I always will. And in that seeing, in that being seen, I've found everything I never knew I needed. I've found love and purpose, and most importantly, I've found myself. I'm no longer the invisible girl in the shadows. I'm a woman who knows her worth, who fights for what she loves, who creates her own light instead of waiting for others to illuminate her. But our story doesn't end there. Because life, real life, isn't a simple happily ever after. It's a continuous journey of choosing each other, day after day, through good times and challenges alike. 3 years after Harrison's birth, Killian faced the greatest threat to his empire yet. A rival organization, seeing an opportunity in what they perceived as his softness after marrying for love rather than strategy, made a play for his territory and influence. The conflict was brutal, testing everything we'd built together. There were nights when Killian came home with blood on his hands, literally and figuratively, from decisions he'd had to make to protect what was ours. There were mornings when I had to be strong for both of us, reminding him of who he was beyond the ruthless heir everyone expected him to be. And there were moments when I had to face my own complicity in his world, accepting that loving him meant accepting all of him, including the parts that lived in shadows. I'm trying to build something better, he told me one night, exhausted and conflicted. A legitimate empire our children can inherit without shame. But these people only understand strength and fear. Then show them strength, I said, taking his hands in mine. But don't lose yourself in the process. Don't become the monster they expect. You're better than that. He fought that war with intelligence and measured force, proving he could be ruthless when necessary while maintaining his humanity. When it was over, when his position was more secure than ever, he made sweeping changes to the organization, pushing even harder toward legitimacy, using his power to protect rather than intimidate. I was his partner through it all, not just the woman who waited at home, but an active participant in building our future. I learned about his businesses, offered perspectives he hadn't considered, became someone he could strategize with in addition to love. Our partnership deepened in ways that went beyond romance, becoming something more complex and resilient. When Elise turned 7, she asked me about Vivian, having overheard snippets of adult conversation. "Why don't I have an aunt?" she asked with a child's direct innocence. I sat her down and told her a version of the truth, simplified but honest. "Your Aunt Vivian and I made choices that hurt each other," I said. "Sometimes even people who love each other can cause pain. We're not close anymore, but that doesn't mean we hate each other. It just means we're living different lives." "That's sad," Elise said with the wisdom of children. "It is," I agreed. "But it's also okay. Sometimes love means letting go and wishing each other well from far away." That conversation prompted me to reach out to Vivian again. We'd exchanged a few letters over the years, brief and careful, but I felt compelled to offer something more. I invited her to lunch, neutral territory, no expectations beyond conversation. To my surprise, she accepted. We met at a quiet restaurant in the city, two women who'd once been sisters, but now felt like strangers. She looked different, older of course, but there was also a softness in her that hadn't been there before. Marriage and motherhood had changed her, just as they'd changed me. The conversation was awkward at first, filled with polite inquiries about our children and carefully neutral topics. But as the meal progressed, we began to dig deeper. "I was awful to you," Vivian said finally, her green eyes meeting mine with something like regret. "Even before Killian, I treated you like a burden, made you feel worthless, and I'm not sure I can fully explain why, except that I was insecure, and you were an easy target." "I betrayed you," I replied, matching her honesty. I fell in love with your fiancé. That's not something you can just excuse or explain away. No, she agreed. But I'm starting to understand that it wasn't about me. Not really. You two found something real, and I was standing in the way of it. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I don't think I ever really loved Killian. I loved what he represented, what he could give me. That's not the same thing. Have you found love? I asked gently. Real love? Her smile was complicated. I'm learning what it means. My husband is patient with me, kinder than I probably deserve. We're building something, slowly. It's not the fairy tale I once imagined, but it's real, and that matters more. We didn't leave that lunch as close sisters, but we left with understanding, and that felt like its own kind of healing. We agreed to let our children meet someday, to not let our complicated history rob them of knowing their cousins. It was a small step, but it was forward movement. As our children grew older, I made sure to teach them the lessons I'd learned. I told Elise that her worth wasn't determined by how others saw her, that she should never make herself small to accommodate someone else's ego. I taught Harrison that strength without kindness was just cruelty, that true power came from choosing compassion even when you had the capacity for ruthlessness. And I showed them both, through my relationship with their father, what real partnership looked like. They saw us disagree and work through it. They saw us support each other's individual pursuits. They saw that love wasn't about possession or control, but about choosing each other, every single day, even when it would be easier not to. Killian transformed over the years, too. The ruthless heir became a father who got down on the floor to play with toy cars, a husband who wasn't afraid to show vulnerability, a man who used his power to create opportunities rather than just accumulate wealth. He never lost his edge in business, but he found balance, and that balance made him more formidable, not less. On our 10th wedding anniversary, he took me back to the creek where our story had begun. The children were with trusted friends for the night, and it was just us in the place where everything had changed. Do you remember that first day? He asked, holding my hand as we stood at the water's edge. When I saw you here, and my entire world shifted? I remember thinking you looked like you'd seen a ghost, I said, smiling at the memory. I remember being terrified and thrilled in equal measure. I knew, he said simply. In that moment, I knew you were going to change my life. I didn't know how, didn't understand it, but I felt it in my bones. You were my destiny, Callista. We made our own destiny, I corrected gently. We chose each other, fought for each other, refused to let the world tell us what we were allowed to have. And I'd do it again, he said fiercely. Every scandal, every sacrifice, every difficult moment. I'd do it all again for this, for us, for the life we've built. He pulled me close, and we kissed there by the water. No longer the forbidden secret we'd once been, but something stronger, something that had weathered storms and emerged victorious. That night, lying in his arms under the stars, I thought about all the versions of myself I'd been. The invisible girl who arranged flowers and stayed quiet. The woman who dared to love despite the cost. The mother who was raising children to know their worth. The partner who'd learned to stand beside rather than behind. The person who'd finally learned to see herself clearly. What are you thinking about? Killian asked, his voice soft in the darkness. How far we've come, I said. How much we've grown, individually and together. Do you have any regrets? He asked, and I heard the vulnerability in the question. Not about us, I answered honestly. Never about us. There are things I wish I'd done differently. Conversations I wish I'd had with Vivian before everything exploded. Ways I wish I'd been stronger earlier. But loving you? Choosing this life? Never. Not for a single second. His arms tightened around me. You made me believe in love, he whispered. Real love. Not the transactional relationships I'd always known. You made me want to be better. To build something meaningful, rather than just accumulating power. You saved me, Callista. We saved each other, I corrected. You showed me I was worth seeing. I showed you that vulnerability wasn't weakness. We did this together. And that was the truth of our story. Not a fairy tale of rescue and redemption, but a real story of two imperfect people who found each other and chose, every single day, to keep choosing each other. As the years continued to pass, our family evolved. Elise grew into a confident young woman who knew her worth and wasn't afraid to demand it. Harrison became a thoughtful young man who balanced strength with compassion. Killian continued to transform the Ashford empire into something our children could be proud of. And I built a legacy of my own, expanding the shelter into a network of support services that helped hundreds of women find their strength and voice. We had our challenges, of course. No relationship, no matter how strong, is without conflict. There were arguments about parenting styles, disagreements about business decisions, moments when old insecurities resurfaced and had to be addressed. But we'd learned how to fight fair, how to listen even when it was hard, how to choose understanding over being right. And through it all, we maintained the core truth that had brought us together. We saw each other, truly saw each other, in all our complexity and contradiction. That seeing was the foundation everything else was built on. Now, as I write this, sitting in the library where Killian first told me he couldn't stop thinking about me, I'm struck by the circularity of our story. It began with being seen, and it continues with that same fundamental act of recognition. Every morning when I wake up next to him, every evening when we sit together after the children are asleep, every moment in between, we choose to see each other, to really see who the other person is, and love them anyway. This is what I want people to understand about our story. It's not about the scandal or the drama or the forbidden nature of how we fell in love. It's about the choice to keep loving, day after day, year after year, even when it would be easier not to. It's about growing together rather than apart. It's about building something real and lasting in a world that often prizes appearance over substance. My name is Callista Ashford, and I'm no longer invisible. I take up space in this world with confidence, knowing my worth, using my voice, creating change. But more than that, I'm a woman who knows what it means to love and be loved completely. I'm a partner to a man who sees me as his equal. I'm a mother raising children to be strong and kind. I'm a person who turned pain into purpose and scandal into strength. And when Killian finds me here in the library, as I knew he would, and pulls me into his arms with the same hunger and reverence he's always had, I know that this love, our love, was worth every sacrifice. "What are you writing?" he asks, kissing the top of my head. "Our story," I say simply. "And how does it end?" I smile against his chest, breathing in the scent that's become home to me. "It doesn't end," I tell him. "It just continues, day after day, choice after choice, until our last breath and beyond." "I like that ending," he says, and in his voice I hear the same certainty that's carried us through every storm. Because this isn't an ending at all. It's a continuation, a testament to the power of being seen and choosing to see in return. It's proof that love, real love, isn't about perfect circumstances or easy choices. It's about commitment and courage and the willingness to fight for what matters. As the sun sets through the library windows, painting everything in gold, I lean into my husband's embrace and feel grateful for every moment that led us here. The good and the bad, the scandal and the triumph, the pain and the joy. All of it was necessary to create this life, this love, this unshakable foundation we've built together. I was invisible once, but I'm invisible no longer. I was voiceless once, but I found my voice. I was lost once, but I've been found, and in the finding, I've discovered who I truly am. And that, ultimately, is the real story. Not just about falling in love, but about falling into yourself, about becoming who you were always meant to be. Killian helped me see that person, but I had to choose to become her. just as I helped him see beyond the ruthless heir to the man he could be. But he had to choose that transformation himself. We chose each other, yes. But more importantly, we chose ourselves, and in doing so, we built something that could never be broken by scandal or judgment or time. This is my story, our story, and I'm finally ready to own every part of it. The shame and the pride, the mistakes and the triumphs, the girl I was and the woman I've become. All of it matters. All of it led me here, to this moment, to this life, to this love that's worth more than any reputation or social standing ever could be. And as Killian tilts my face up to his and kisses me with a passion that still makes my heart race after all these years, I know with absolute certainty that I would choose this path again. Every single time, without hesitation. The memory of how we got here is never far from my mind, especially in quiet moments like these. Every detail is etched into my consciousness, from the terror of those early days to the triumph of building something real and lasting against impossible odds. I remember the second time Killian came to the creek, 3 days after that first sighting. I'd told myself I wouldn't return there, that I'd avoid the place that had somehow become charged with dangerous possibility. But my feet carried me there anyway, drawn by something I didn't want to name. He was already there, waiting, standing in almost the exact same spot where he'd stood before. This time, though, he spoke. "I've been coming here every day," he said without preamble, his voice rough as if he'd been arguing with himself. "Hoping you'd come back, knowing I should stay away but unable to stop myself." I stood at the edge of the trees, not yet stepping into the clearing, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "This is wrong," I said, but I didn't leave. "I know," he agreed. "I know it's wrong. I know what I should do, what the right choice is. But Callista, I can't stop seeing your face. I close my eyes and you're there. I wake up and my first thought is of you. I sit across from your sister at dinner, and all I can think about is finding you, being near you, hearing your voice." "You don't even know me," I protested weakly. "Then let me," he said, and there was something almost desperate in his tone. "Let me know you. Tell me about yourself, about what you love, what you dream about, what makes you happy. Give me something, anything, because this not knowing is driving me insane." That was the beginning. We started meeting at the creek, stolen moments where we simply talked. I told him about losing my parents, about the accident that had changed everything, about how Vivian had taken me in, but made me feel like a burden every single day since. I told him about my love for gardening, for old books, for early mornings when the world was quiet. He listened as if every word mattered, as if I was saying something profound instead of just sharing mundane details of an unremarkable life. And he told me about himself in return, about growing up as the heir to an empire he'd never asked for, being molded from childhood to be ruthless and strategic, about his mother's death and how it had hardened his father, made him even more determined to turn Killian into a perfect successor, about the loneliness of always being wanted for what he could provide rather than who he was, about the weight of expectations that never let him breathe. "I was engaged at 15, he told me one afternoon as we sat by the water. Not to Vivian, to another girl from another family. Her name was Charlotte. We were supposed to marry when I turned 25, solidify an alliance between our organizations. She died in a car accident when I was 23. Everyone told me how tragic it was, how sorry they were. But you want to know the terrible truth?" He looked at me then, and I saw something raw and honest in his eyes. "I barely felt anything," he continued. "We'd spent years going through the motions of a relationship, being paraded at events together, discussing wedding plans that felt like business negotiations. When she died, I was sad, but not heartbroken, not destroyed, just sad that a young woman had died. And I hated myself for not feeling more, for not loving her the way I should have. You can't force love," I said softly. It's not something you can will into existence just because it would be convenient. That's what I'm learning, he said, reaching out to take my hand. Because what I feel when I'm with you, this is something I've never experienced before. This consuming need to be near you, to know everything about you, to make you smile. This terror that grips me when I think about you leaving. This is what love should feel like, isn't it? This overwhelming, irrational, completely illogical pull toward another person? I squeezed his hand, unable to speak past the emotion clogging my throat. Because yes, this was exactly what love felt like, and it was beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Those meetings at the creek continued for weeks. We'd steal an hour here, 30 minutes there, whenever we could manage it without arousing suspicion. We talked about everything and nothing. He brought me books he thought I'd like. I brought him wildflowers from the gardens. We were courting in secret, building a foundation of understanding and connection that made what was coming both inevitable and devastating. The first time he kissed me was during a thunderstorm. I'd run to the creek despite the weather, needing escape from a particularly brutal day where Vivian had spent hours criticizing everything about me in front of her wedding planner. Killian found me there, soaked through and crying, and without a word he pulled me into his arms. I can't do this anymore, he said against my wet hair. I can't watch her treat you like that. I can't keep pretending I don't feel what I feel. Callista, I'm in love with you. Completely, devastatingly in love with you. Before I could respond, his mouth was on mine, desperate and claiming, and I kissed him back with equal fervor. The rain poured down on us, thunder crashed overhead, and we clung to each other like we were the only solid things in a world that had gone liquid and unstable. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathing hard, the weight of what we'd just admitted hung between us like a physical presence. What do we do? I whispered. I don't know, he admitted. But I know I can't marry her. Not now. Not ever. That kiss changed everything and nothing. We still had to go back to the house, still had to sit through dinners watching Vivian plan a wedding that would never happen. The guilt ate at me constantly. I'd catch glimpses of myself in mirrors and barely recognize the woman staring back. Someone who was betraying her only family. Someone who was in love with her sister's fiancé. But I couldn't stop. Couldn't give him up. The thought of walking away, of never seeing him again, of watching him marry Vivian, was physically painful, in a way I'd never experienced. Vivian, meanwhile, was becoming increasingly unstable. She sensed something was wrong, could feel Killian pulling away, even if she didn't understand why. She became obsessed with the wedding, as if making it more elaborate and expensive would somehow secure his attention. The guest list expanded to 500. She commissioned a dress that cost more than most people's houses. She planned a honeymoon that would last 2 months and span 4 continents. And she became even crueler to me. The verbal abuse escalated to where I dreaded any interaction with her. She criticized my appearance constantly, told me I was lucky she let me live there because no one else would want me. She made me eat separately from her and Killian, said my presence at the table was depressing. She assigned me more and more menial tasks, treating me like a servant rather than a sister. Killian saw all of it, and I could watch the conflict warring inside him. He wanted to protect me, to end the engagement immediately, but he also knew that doing so would create a scandal that would affect both of us. He was trying to find a way to break things off with minimal damage, but Vivian wasn't making it easy. She'd started dropping hints to society columnists about the upcoming wedding, making it more and more public, raising the stakes with every announcement. I'm going to tell her, Killian said to me one night when we met in the old stables. It was past midnight, and we were both risking discovery, but we needed to see each other. I can't wait any longer. She's destroying you, and I won't stand by and watch it happen. It will be a disaster, I said, even though I wanted him to do it, wanted this secret to be out in the open. Then let it be a disaster, he replied fiercely. I'd rather face scandal with you than live a lie without you. He had a plan. He'd hired lawyers, had drawn up settlement agreements that would compensate Vivian's family for the broken engagement. He'd spoken quietly with key business partners, preparing them for the change. He was going to announce it at a small family dinner, give Vivian privacy to process the news before it became public knowledge. But fate, as always, had other ideas. Because 2 days before his planned announcement, Vivian found us in the rose garden, and everything exploded in the worst possible way. The aftermath of that discovery was even more brutal than I'd imagined. Vivian didn't just tell everyone what had happened. She created a narrative that painted me as a calculating seductress who'd planned the whole thing from the moment I arrived. She gave interviews to gossip magazines, appeared on society podcasts, told anyone who would listen that I'd deliberately targeted her fiancé out of jealousy. The hate mail wasn't just letters. There were packages with destroyed photos of me, dolls with my face pasted on them torn apart, threatening messages that made my blood run cold. Some women would cross the street when they saw me coming. Others would make sure to bump into me hard enough to leave bruises. One woman threw coffee at me in a cafe, screaming that I was a homewrecker and a whore. Killian hired bodyguards for me, insisted I not go anywhere alone. But even with protection, the psychological toll was immense. I stopped sleeping through the night, would wake up from nightmares where everyone was pointing at me, screaming accusations. I lost weight, became jumpier, started to believe the things people were saying about me. There was one particularly dark night, about 3 weeks after the scandal broke, when I seriously considered leaving. Just disappearing, changing my name, starting over somewhere Killian couldn't find me. I packed a bag, wrote him a letter explaining that I couldn't be the reason his life fell apart. I made it all the way to the train station before he found me. "Don't you dare," he said, his voice breaking as he took the bag from my hands. "Don't you dare leave me. I can't do this without you, Callista. I won't survive it." "You're losing everything because of me," I sobbed. "Your reputation, your business, your family's respect. How can I stay knowing that?" "You're not the cause of this," he insisted, pulling me into his arms right there on the platform, while curious onlookers stared. "I made this choice. I'm the one who pursued you, who fell in love with you, who decided I'd rather have scandal and truth than respectability and lies. You don't get to take responsibility for my decisions." "But I'm destroying you," I whispered against his chest. "No," he said firmly. "You're saving me. Every day I wake up and choose you. I'm choosing authenticity over expectation, love over duty, happiness over hollow success. You're not destroying me, Callista. You're making me whole for the first time in my life." He took me home that night, and I never tried to leave again. But the incident made me realize I needed to find my own strength, my own purpose beyond just being Killian's partner. That's when I started volunteering at the women's shelter, when I began building my own identity separate from both my relationship with him and my history with Vivian. The shelter became my sanctuary and my mission. I met women who'd been through unimaginable hardships, who'd survived abuse and poverty and abandonment, and they inspired me with their resilience. I started leading workshops on self-worth and finding your voice. I created programs to help women develop job skills and financial independence. And in helping them, I helped myself, found the strength I'd been missing. Killian watched my transformation with pride. "You're magnificent," he told me one evening after I'd successfully secured funding for a new housing unit. "You're building something real and important, making a genuine difference in people's lives." "I learned from you," I said. "You taught me that power should be used for creation, not just accumulation. That we have a responsibility to help others, especially those who are vulnerable." Our relationship evolved beyond just romantic love. We became true partners, supporting each other's ambitions, challenging each other to be better. He consulted me on business decisions, valued my perspective. I relied on his strategic thinking to help grow the shelter's reach and impact. We were building a life together that was about more than just our love for each other. It was about creating something meaningful in the world. The business challenges Killian faced weren't just about his rivals seeing weakness. Some of his own organization questioned whether he was still fit to lead. There was a particularly tense meeting where one of the older lieutenants openly challenged him. "You've gone soft," Marco DeLuca said, his voice carrying across the conference room. "Making decisions based on emotion instead of strategy. That's dangerous in our line of work." Killian's response was controlled, but deadly. "I've made exactly one personal decision that contradicts strategy," he said, his voice quiet but commanding absolute attention. "Everything else has been calculated to strengthen our position and legitimize our operations. We've expanded into 3 new markets, increased revenue by 40%, and reduced our exposure to legal liability by half. If that's what you call soft, I suggest you reevaluate your definition." "But the scandal," Marco persisted, "the embarrassment of it all, was temporary," Killian finished, "and has already begun to fade as we knew it would. Meanwhile, I've demonstrated to everyone here that I'm capable of making difficult choices and standing by them regardless of criticism. That's not weakness, Marco. That's strength. If you disagree, the door is open. But know that if you walk through it, you won't be walking back in." The room fell silent. Marco backed down, and no one challenged Killian's authority again. But the incident made me realize just how much he was sacrificing for our relationship, how much courage it took to stand firm in the face of that kind of pressure. The legal battle with Vivian's family was another complication. They threatened to sue for breach of contract, claiming the broken engagement had damaged their reputation and cost them business opportunities. Killian's lawyers handled most of it, but there were depositions I had to sit through, questions designed to humiliate and break me. "Isn't it true that you deliberately seduced Mr. Ashford?" one of their lawyers asked during a particularly brutal session. "No," I answered steadily, though my hands were shaking under the table. "I actively resisted my feelings for months. Mr. Ashford pursued the relationship." "But you didn't refuse his advances." "Eventually, no. I didn't refuse them, because I had fallen in love with him. Despite knowing he was engaged to your sister." "Despite that, yes. Love doesn't adhere to convenient timelines or appropriate circumstances. It simply happens." The lawyer smirked. "How convenient for you. Falling in love with one of the wealthiest men on the East Coast while living as a dependent in his home." Killian's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. That quote made it into several publications, further cementing my image as a gold digger and opportunist. But I held my head high, repeated the truth until my voice was hoarse, and refused to let them break me. The case was eventually settled out of court, with Killian paying a substantial sum to Vivian's family. It galled me that they profited from what had happened, but Killian was philosophical about it. "It's just money," he said, "and it buys us peace, allows us to move forward without this hanging over our heads. That's worth any price." But the toll of all these battles, legal and social and business, was significant. There were nights when I'd find Killian in his study, staring blankly at papers he wasn't actually reading, the weight of everything pressing down on him. During those times, I'd sit with him in silence, just being present, reminding him that he wasn't alone in this fight. And there were times when I was the one who needed that support. Days when the relentless criticism and hatred got to be too much, when I started to believe that maybe I really was the terrible person everyone said I was. Killian would talk me through those dark moments, remind me of my worth, show me evidence of the good I was doing through the shelter work. "You're helping dozens of women rebuild their lives," he'd say, showing me testimonials and success stories. "You're giving them hope and resources and a path forward. That's who you are, Callista, not the monster they've created in their imaginations." Slowly, painfully slowly, things did begin to improve. The scandal gradually faded as new dramas took its place in the public consciousness. Some people would always judge us, would always see our relationship as fundamentally wrong, but others began to soften. Particularly after Margaret Cavendish's endorsement, more people were willing to give us a chance. I'll never forget the first event we attended after the scandal, where we weren't treated like pariahs. It was a charity gala for children's literacy, And while some people still gave us cold looks, others actually approached to have genuine conversations. One woman, someone I'd seen at other events who'd previously snubbed me, came up and apologized. "I judged you without knowing the whole story," she said. "I've been reading about your shelter work, and I'm impressed. I'd like to donate if you're accepting contributions." It was a small thing, but it felt like a turning point. From that night on, I started to rebuild a reputation based on my own merits, rather than just being defined by scandal. I became known not as the woman who stole her sister's fiancé, but as the woman who runs that incredible shelter program. Killian's business continued to evolve too. He was serious about legitimizing the Ashford operations, gradually phasing out the shadier aspects while building up legal enterprises. It wasn't easy, and there were people within the organization who resisted, who profited from the darker side of things and didn't want to change. But Killian was patient and strategic, making moves that weakened opposition while strengthening his own position. One of the most significant moves he made was partnering with law enforcement on a major anti-trafficking initiative. The operation was dangerous, requiring Killian to use his old connections in ways that put him at personal risk. I remember the 3 months he spent working on that case, the late nights when he'd come home exhausted and morally conflicted, questioning whether he was doing enough, whether the risks were worth it. "There are children involved," he told me one night, his voice raw with emotion. "Kids younger than Elise will be when she's born. They're being bought and sold like property, and I have information that could save them. How can I not use it?" "Then use it," I said, even though the thought of him in danger made my stomach churn with fear. "But please, please be careful. Our baby needs their father." He'd placed his hand on my swollen belly then, feeling the kicks of our unborn daughter, and I'd seen the determination solidify in his eyes. "She's going to grow up in a better world," he'd said, "even if I have to tear apart my father's old empire piece by piece to make it happen." The operation culminated in a raid that freed 43 people, including 11 children. Killian was there, working with federal agents, and I didn't sleep the entire night until I got his call that it was over and he was safe. The news coverage was extensive, and for the first time since our scandal, the Ashford name was associated with something unquestionably good. "You're using your past to create a better future," I told him when he finally made it home, still wearing the clothes he'd had on for the raid. "That takes real courage." "I'm trying to build something our children can be proud of," he replied, his hand finding my belly again. "An empire that doesn't require them to compromise their morals or live in the shadows. I want them to carry the Ashford name with pride, not shame." That anti-trafficking work became ongoing. Killian established a foundation, funded programs to prevent exploitation, worked with lawmakers to strengthen protections for vulnerable populations. It was dangerous work, made him enemies among people who profited from human suffering, but he never backed down. There was one incident, when Elise was about 6 months old, when someone tried to send a message to Killian about his anti-trafficking efforts. A car bomb, planted in the garage of our home. Thankfully, Killian's security team found it before anyone was hurt, but the message was clear: stop interfering, or there would be consequences. I was nursing Elise when he told me about it, and the fear that gripped me was paralyzing. "Maybe you should step back from this work," I said, holding our daughter tighter. "It's too dangerous, Killian. We have children now. We can't risk—" "That's exactly why I have to keep going," he interrupted gently. "Because we have children. Because other people have children who are being hurt right now. Because if people like me, who have power and resources and connections, don't fight this, who will?" He was right, of course. But that didn't make it easier to watch him walk out the door, knowing there were people who wanted him dead. We increased security, hired more bodyguards, took precautions that made our lives feel sometimes like a prison. But we endured because the work mattered. The foundation grew over the years, becoming one of the leading organizations in combating human trafficking in our region. I got involved too, using my experience with the women's shelter to create programs for survivors. Together, we were building something that would outlast us, that would make a real difference in the world. It was through that foundation work that I met Teresa, a young woman who'd been trafficked at 15 and rescued at 19. She'd gone through our rehabilitation program, was building a new life, and wanted to work at the shelter helping other survivors. Her story could have been mine in different circumstances, and I saw in her the same hunger to transform pain into purpose. "You understand," she said during her interview. "Most people look at survivors with pity or curiosity. You look at us and see strength, potential, possibility. That's what we need." Teresa became my protégée and eventually a dear friend. She helped me expand the shelter's services, brought perspectives I couldn't have had, connected with clients in ways I couldn't. Watching her thrive, seeing her move from victim to survivor to advocate, reminded me of my own journey. We'd both been written off by people, both been told we were nothing, and we'd both proven them spectacularly wrong. The shelter program grew significantly under our joint leadership. We opened 3 additional locations, started a job training center, created a legal clinic to help women navigate custody issues and restraining orders. What had started as a small volunteer effort became a comprehensive support network, and I poured my heart into making it as effective as possible. But balancing that work with motherhood was challenging. There were times when I felt torn in too many directions, guilty that I wasn't spending enough time with my children, or guilty that I wasn't giving enough to the women who needed help. Killian and I had many late-night discussions about priorities and balance, figuring out how to build the life we wanted while also doing the work that mattered to us. "You're an incredible mother," he assured me during one particularly difficult week when I was struggling with guilt. "Our children are loved, safe, and thriving. And you're also showing them that women can be more than just mothers, that we have a responsibility to use our privilege to help others. That's an important lesson." "But I missed Elise's ballet recital rehearsal," I said, tears threatening. "And I haven't read to Harrison in 3 nights because I've been working late on the funding proposal." "And tomorrow you'll read him twice as many books," Killian said gently. "And Elise knows you'll be at the actual recital, which is what matters. You're not perfect, Callista. Neither am I. But we're doing our best, and our children know they're loved. That's what they'll remember." He was right, of course. The kids did understand, especially as they got older, and could see the impact of the work we were doing. Elise started volunteering at the shelter when she was 10, helping organize donations and playing with clients' children. Harrison, in his quieter way, created art pieces that we auctioned off to raise funds. They were growing up understanding that privilege came with responsibility, that they had a duty to help others. The business side of Killian's empire continued to evolve too. He sold off the last of the questionable enterprises when Elise was 7, taking a significant financial hit to do it, but emerging with a completely legitimate operation. The Ashford Group became known for real estate development, tech investments, and philanthropic work. It was a radical transformation from what his father had built, and there were people in the old organization who never forgave him for it. One of them was his uncle, Marcus Ashford, who'd been heavily involved in the criminal side of the business. Marcus confronted Killian at a family gathering when Elise was 8, accused him of betraying his father's legacy and going soft. "Your father built this empire with blood and strength," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the room. "And you're dismantling it piece by piece for what? To look respectable? To please your whore wife?" The room went silent. Elise, who'd been playing nearby, looked up in confusion, and I could see Killian's jaw clench dangerously. "Get out," Killian said, his voice quiet but deadly. "Get out of my house, and don't ever speak about my wife that way again." "Or what?" Marcus challenged. "You'll sick your lawyers on me? That's your answer to everything now, isn't it? Lawyers and press releases instead of action." What happened next happened so fast I almost missed it. Killian crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbed Marcus by the collar, and slammed him against the wall. All the violence he'd been suppressing, all the old skills he'd been taught, were suddenly visible. I made a choice to build something legitimate, Killian said, his voice dangerously calm. That doesn't mean I've forgotten how to handle threats. You disrespect my wife again, and you'll learn exactly how much of the old Killian still exists. Are we clear? Marcus, for all his bravado, had gone pale. He nodded, and Killian released him, stepping back. I think it's time for you to leave, Killian said. And Marcus? You're out. Out of the organization, out of the family business, out of our lives. I'll have the lawyers contact you about your severance. After Marcus left, Killian found me and Elise in the garden, where I'd taken her to escape the confrontation. He knelt in front of our daughter, his face serious. I'm sorry you had to see that, sweetheart, he said. Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements, and I should have handled that better. Uncle Marcus was mean about Mommy, Elise said, her young face fierce. You were protecting her, like you taught me to protect people who are being picked on. Killian's eyes met mine over our daughter's head, and I could see the pride and pain mixed there. That's right, he said. But there are better ways to protect people than violence. I should have just asked him to leave instead of putting my hands on him. But you didn't hurt him, Elise pointed out. You just scared him, and he deserved to be scared for being mean. We talked with her more about standing up to bullies, but also about controlling your temper and choosing your battles. It was one of many conversations we'd have with our children about navigating a complex world with integrity. That incident with Marcus highlighted something Killian and I had been discussing: the ongoing challenge of leaving his past behind while dealing with people who wanted to pull him back. There were business associates who missed the old days, who resented the new direction. There were family members who felt entitled to the wealth Killian was generating through legitimate means. There were people who saw his transformation as weakness rather than strength. But Killian held firm to his vision. I'm building a legacy, he told me one night as we went over the latest business reports. Not just wealth that will evaporate or get seized by authorities, but something sustainable that our children and grandchildren can maintain with pride. That's worth more than all the dirty money in the world. The challenge came not just from people in his past, but also from learning to navigate a world he'd never really been part of before. Legitimate business had its own politics, its own unwritten rules, and Killian had to learn them while already being handicapped by his family's reputation. There was a major real estate deal he was trying to close, one that would have been enormously profitable and helped revitalize a struggling neighborhood. But the other party pulled out at the last minute, citing concerns about being associated with the Ashford name. It was a significant setback, both financially and emotionally. They don't see what you've built, I said, holding him as he processed the disappointment. They only see the past. Maybe they always will, he replied, frustration evident in his voice. Maybe no matter what I do, I'll always be my father's son to these people. Then we find people who are willing to see beyond that, I said firmly. We build relationships with people who value integrity and transformation, and we prove ourselves through our actions over and over, until even the skeptics have to acknowledge what we've accomplished. That's exactly what we did. We cultivated partnerships with people who believed in second chances and redemption. We demonstrated our commitment to ethical business practices through transparency and consistency. We let our work speak for itself, and gradually, it started to work. The Ashford name began to be associated with positive things: the Anti-Trafficking Foundation, the Shelter Network, the community development projects Killian funded. We were rewriting the narrative, not through spin or public relations campaigns, but through genuine change and sustained effort. When Vivian and I had that first coffee meeting, 7 years after the scandal, I was surprised by how much we'd both changed. She was softer, more self-aware than the woman I remembered, and I was stronger, more confident in my own worth. I spent years being angry, she admitted over lattes. Angry at you, angry at Killian, angry at myself, and that anger was eating me alive. My marriage was suffering because I couldn't let go of what happened. I'm sorry, I said for what felt like the 100th time. I know you are, she replied, and I'm learning to accept that. But Callista, I need to tell you something. I wasn't a good sister to you, long before Killian entered the picture. I was jealous of you. That shocked me. Jealous? Of me? Why would you be jealous? Because you were genuine, she said simply. You felt things deeply, loved purely, never pretended to be something you weren't. I was always performing, always calculating, always trying to be what other people wanted, and I resented you for being naturally what I could never manage to fake. We talked for 3 hours that day, peeling back layers of hurt and misunderstanding, getting to truths we'd never acknowledged before. It didn't fix everything, didn't erase the past, but it started a healing process that continues to this day. Over the years, Vivian and I have built something new. Not the sister relationship we might have had if our lives had been different, but a kind of understanding and mutual respect. We celebrate major milestones together. Our children play together sometimes. We check in on each other during difficult times. It's not perfect, and there are still moments of awkwardness and pain, but it's something, and that's more than I ever hoped for. Her husband, Jean-Paul, turned out to be different from what I'd imagined. He was kind where I'd expected coldness, genuine where I'd expected calculation. At a family gathering, years into our cautious reconciliation, he pulled me aside. "Thank you," he said, surprising me. "For what?" "For breaking her engagement to Ashford," he replied. "I know that sounds strange, but if you hadn't, I never would have met her. And despite how we started, I love her very much. She's the mother of my children, my partner, my best friend. So thank you for the heartbreak that led her to me." It was a perspective I'd never considered, that our scandal might have led to something good for someone else. It reminded me that life is infinitely complex, that actions have ripple effects we can't predict, that sometimes what seems like tragedy plants seeds for future joy. As our children grew into their teenage years, new challenges emerged. Elise started dating at 15, and I had to navigate conversations about healthy relationships and recognizing your worth. How do you teach your daughter about choosing wisely when your own love story started with betraying your sister? The circumstances of how your father and I got together aren't what I'd want for you, I told her honestly during one mother-daughter talk. What I want you to take from our story is that love should make you stronger, not weaker. It should bring out the best in you, not require you to compromise your values. Your father and I had to learn that the hard way, through pain and scandal. I hope you'll learn it through better examples. But you love each other, Elise pointed out. Really love each other. I see how you look at each other, how you support each other. That's what I want someday. Then wait for it, I said. Don't settle for less than real partnership, real respect, real love. And don't mistake intensity for compatibility, obsession for affection. Learn from our mistakes and our successes both. Harrison, approaching 16, was struggling with his own identity questions. Being a son of Killian Ashford came with expectations and assumptions he was still figuring out how to navigate. He was gentle where people expected ruthlessness, artistic where they expected strategic. I found him in the garden one day, clearly upset. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, sitting beside him. "Everyone expects me to be like Dad," he said. "To want to run the business, to be tough and commanding. But that's not who I am, Mom. I like beautiful things and quiet spaces and creating art. What if I'm a disappointment?" My heart broke for him. "Harrison, look at me," I said, waiting until his eyes met mine. "Your father loves you exactly as you are. He chose to transform his life, to build something different from what his father built, precisely so you could be whoever you wanted to be. The only way you could disappoint us is by pretending to be someone you're not. But the family business will be run by whoever is best suited for it," I interrupted. "Maybe that's Elise, who has a head for strategy. Maybe it's someone we hire from outside the family. Maybe you'll..." Surprise us all and discover you love business, but approach it differently than your father. But you don't owe your life to anyone's expectations, Harrison, not even ours. I talked to Killian about it that night, and he made a point of having a long conversation with Harrison, reassuring him that he was loved and valued regardless of his career choices. I spent my whole life living up to other people's expectations, Killian told our son. I don't want that for you. I want you to find what makes you come alive and pursue it with passion. That's the legacy I hope to leave you. Freedom to choose your own path. These parenting moments, navigating our children's growth while teaching them from our experiences, became some of the most meaningful of our lives. We weren't perfect parents by any means, made plenty of mistakes, but we were honest and present, and committed to helping our kids become their best selves. The shelter program continued to expand, and by the time I'd been running it for 12 years, we'd helped over 1,000 women rebuild their lives. Teresa had become the executive director, while I served as board chair and still worked directly with some clients. We'd developed model programs that other shelters across the country were adopting, had influenced policy changes, had made a measurable impact on our community. One evening, at a gala celebrating the shelter's 15th anniversary, I stood at the podium to give a speech. Looking out at the crowd, I saw Killian and our children in the front row, saw Vivian and her family a few rows back, saw Teresa and dozens of women we'd helped scattered throughout the audience. I saw the life I'd built, the impact I'd made, the community I'd created. 15 years ago, I began. I was a woman who felt invisible, worthless, unable to imagine I could make a difference in anyone's life. I was drowning in other people's expectations and my own self-doubt. Today, I stand before you as someone who learned that being seen starts with seeing yourself, that creating change begins with believing you're capable of it. I talked about the women we'd helped, the lives that had been transformed, the children who'd been protected. I talked about the power of giving someone a second chance, of believing in their potential even when they couldn't see it themselves. Every woman who walks through our doors brings her own story of pain and survival, I said. And every woman who walks out carries hope and the tools to build a different future. That transformation is what drives this work, what makes every challenge worth facing, what reminds me why we do what we do. The standing ovation that followed wasn't for me personally, but for the collective effort of everyone involved in the shelter's work. But Killian's eyes, shining with pride and love, told me he understood what this moment meant, how far I'd come from that invisible girl to this woman making a difference. After the gala, as we drove home with our tired but happy children in the back seat, Killian reached over and took my hand. "I'm proud of you," he said simply, "of who you've become, what you've built, the lives you've touched." "We built it together," I reminded him. "Your support, your resources, your belief in me made all of this possible." "No," he disagreed gently. "I provided resources. You provided vision, passion, and the day-to-day work that made it real. This is your legacy, Callista. Own it." And I did. I finally, fully owned my accomplishments, my worth, my place in the world. It had taken years of work, therapy, countless conversations with Killian and friends, and my own reflection, but I'd reached a place of genuine self-acceptance and confidence. That confidence was tested when, 3 years ago, a prominent journalist published a long-form article revisiting our scandal. The Ashford affair, a decade later, rehashed all the old details, interviewed people from both sides, examined how our story had unfolded. I was terrified that all the progress we'd made would be undone, that we'd be dragged back through public judgment again. But the article was surprisingly balanced. Yes, it covered the scandal, but it also examined what we'd built in the years since. It talked about Killian's transformation of the family business, about the foundation's anti-trafficking work, about the shelter's impact. It interviewed people we'd helped, who spoke about how we'd changed their lives. And it concluded that whatever mistakes we'd made and how our relationship began, We'd spent the decade since trying to make amends through meaningful action. More importantly, I realized that reading about our story didn't destroy me the way it once would have. I could acknowledge that yes, we'd made choices that hurt people, that our love story began in morally complicated circumstances, while also recognizing that we'd worked to become better people, to use our privilege for good, to build something meaningful. How do you feel about the article? Killian asked after it published. Surprisingly okay, I admitted. It's not the story I would have written about us, but it's not inaccurate either. We made mistakes, and we've tried to do better. That's the truth. You've come a long way from the woman who wanted to disappear after the scandal broke, he observed. I've had a good teacher, I said, squeezing his hand. You showed me how to stand firm in the face of criticism, how to let your actions speak louder than others' judgments. Now, as I sit here writing this, our children are practically adults. Elise is applying to colleges, interested in international development and social justice. Harrison is creating a portfolio for art school applications, producing stunning work that blends traditional and modern techniques. They're becoming independent, preparing to leave home and build their own lives. And while that brings some sadness, it's mostly filled with pride. Killian and I are planning for our next phase too. He's transitioning more operational control of the Ashford Group to trusted executives, wanting to focus more on philanthropic work and spending time with family. I'm writing a book about my experiences, hoping to reach women who feel invisible and show them they have value and power they haven't yet recognized. We talk sometimes about growing old together, about becoming grandparents someday, about all the adventures still ahead of us. And we remember, always, the journey that brought us here, the price we paid for this love, the lives that were affected by our choices. Do you think we did more good than harm? I asked him recently, a question that still weighs on me sometimes. I think we're human, he replied thoughtfully. We made choices that hurt people, particularly Vivian, but we've spent every day since trying to make amends, to use our second chance to create positive change. We've helped thousands of people, raised good kids, built something meaningful. That doesn't erase the hurt we caused, but it balances the scales somewhat. I hope Vivian sees it that way, I said. I think she's getting there, Killian replied. The fact that she lets her children spend time with ours, that she comes to family events, that she's built her own happy life, suggests she's found peace with what happened. And maybe that's the best we can hope for. Not perfect forgiveness, not complete erasure of the past, but peace. The ability to look back without being consumed by regret, to look forward with hope, to be present in the moment with gratitude. This morning, I was back at the creek where it all began. I go there sometimes when I need to think, to remember, to reconnect with who I was and who I've become. The water looked the same as it did that day 20 years ago when Killian first saw me, but everything else had changed so completely. I'm not that invisible girl anymore. I'm a woman who knows her worth, who's built a legacy of helping others, who's loved and been loved deeply. I carry scars from the journey, certainly, but they're badges of survival and growth rather than sources of shame. Killian found me there, as I'd known he would. He has an uncanny ability to know when I need him, to appear exactly when I'm thinking about our story and our life together. What are you thinking about? He asked, settling beside me on the bank. Everything, I said. Our beginning, our journey, where we are now, where we're going. Regrets? Some, I admitted. I wish we could have found each other under different circumstances, that we hadn't hurt Vivian so badly. But I can't regret loving you, building this life with you, becoming who I am now. The pain shaped me, taught me, made me stronger. Me too, he said, putting his arm around me. And for what it's worth, I think Vivian is stronger too. She had to rebuild her life, discover who she was independent of the perfect image she'd created. That's valuable, even if the catalyst was painful. We sat there in comfortable silence, watching the water flow, birds singing in the trees above us. 20 years of history, of love, of growth, of transformation. A lifetime of memories built from that first moment of recognition. I love you, I said, the words as true now as they were the first time I spoke them. I love you too, he replied. Then now, always. And in that moment, sitting by the creek where our impossible love story began, I felt complete peace. Not because our journey has been easy or perfect, but because it's been real, authentic, ours. We've earned this peace through years of work, of growth, of choosing each other, and choosing to be better people. This is my story, our story, and I'm finally ready to own every part of it. The shame and the pride, the mistakes and the triumphs, the girl I was and the woman I've become. All of it matters. All of it led me here, to this moment, to this life, to this love that's worth more than any reputation or social standing ever could be. The mention of children was becoming more frequent in our conversations. We both wanted a family, wanted to create something beautiful and good out of the love we'd fought so hard to protect. But we also knew that bringing children into our still complicated world required careful thought. They'll face questions, I said one night as we discussed the possibility. Other children will have heard stories about us, about how we got together. It could be hard for them. Which is why we'll raise them to be strong, Killian responded. To know their worth isn't determined by other people's opinions. To understand that sometimes love requires difficult choices and courage. They'll have the full truth, age appropriately shared, and they'll see how we handled adversity with integrity. You really think we can do this? I asked, vulnerability creeping into my voice. Build a normal family despite everything? I don't think we'll ever be normal, he said with a slight smile. But I think we can build something better than normal, something real and strong and filled with love. Yes, Callista, I absolutely believe we can do this. And we did. Our wedding was the first step, that intimate ceremony that felt like both an ending and a beginning. But the real building of our life together came after, in the daily choices to support each other, challenge each other, love each other, even when it was difficult. When Elise was born, I was terrified. Terrified of being a mother, of potentially failing her the way I felt I'd failed in so many other areas of my life. But holding her for the first time, looking into those perfect tiny features, I felt a fierce protectiveness and love, unlike anything I'd experienced before. Killian was there for every moment, not just present, but actively engaged. He changed diapers and did midnight feedings, walked the floors when she was colicky, sang to her in his slightly off-key voice. He was gentle in a way I'd never seen him be, this powerful man reduced to putty in his daughter's tiny hands. She's perfect, he'd say over and over, marveling at her. We made her, I'd reply, still amazed by the miracle of it. Motherhood changed me in profound ways. It made me more patient, more grounded, more certain of my priorities. All the societal criticism and judgment that had once hurt so badly seemed trivial compared to making sure my daughter knew she was loved and valued. My work at the shelter took on new meaning too. I was even more committed to helping women create stable futures because I understood on a visceral level how important that stability was for children. When Harrison came along 2 years later, our family felt complete. He was different from Elise from the start, more contemplative where she was adventurous, but equally loved. Watching my 2 children grow, seeing Killian with them, I felt a contentment I'd never imagined possible for someone like me. But life wasn't all domestic bliss. The challenges continued, just in different forms. Killian's work, even as it became more legitimate, still came with dangers. There were threats from competitors, from people who resented his success, from those who hadn't forgiven the old Ashford organization for past actions. We had security measures, lived with an awareness of potential danger that was exhausting. And there were moments when the past came back to haunt us. Like when Elise was 5 and came home from school crying because another child had told her that her mommy was a bad person who stole her daddy from her aunt. Explaining that situation to a 5-year-old in terms she could understand while being honest was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, I told her, holding her close. Your daddy was supposed to marry Aunt Vivian, but he realized they didn't love each other the right way. And he did meet me and realize he loved me. That hurt Aunt Vivian's feelings very badly, and she's still sad about it. Some people think we did something very wrong, and other people understand that sometimes life is complicated. But you love Daddy, and Daddy loves you, Elise said with a child's straightforward logic. Yes, sweetie, very much. Then I think it's okay, she decided. And in that moment, I learned something from my daughter about forgiveness and acceptance that I'd been struggling with for years. The letter from Vivian about Harrison's birth had surprised me, that hint of understanding and grace. But it took another 3 years before we actually spoke in person again, and only then because of a chance encounter at a mutual friend's funeral. We saw each other across the church, two sisters who'd become strangers, and after the service ended, we found ourselves face to face. Your children are beautiful, Vivian said, her first words to me in over 5 years. Thank you, I replied. I heard you have two as well. Twin boys? Yes. Her smile was complicated. They're a handful, but I love them more than I thought possible. We stood there awkwardly for a moment, years of hurt and anger and regret hanging between us like a physical barrier. I'm sorry, I said finally. I know I've said it in letters, but I need to say it to your face. I'm sorry for the pain I caused you, for the betrayal, for everything. There's no excuse for what happened, only explanation, and I understand if you can never forgive me. I'm sorry too, she said, and I could see she meant it. For how I treated you before Killian, for making you feel worthless and invisible, for not being the sister you deserved. You were right that day in the garden. I made you feel like you owed me everything, when really I owed you basic human decency and love. We didn't hug, didn't have a tearful reconciliation, but we did exchange phone numbers, agreed to try having coffee sometime, acknowledged that maybe, possibly, we could find a way to at least be cordial. That lunch happened a month later, the one I mentioned before where we began the slow process of understanding. And even now, years later, our relationship remains complicated. We're not close, probably never will be, but we found a way to coexist, to let our children know each other, to wish each other well from our separate lives. Last year, on what would have been our parents' 70th birthdays had they lived, Vivian called me. I was thinking about them today, she said, about how they'd probably be disappointed in both of us for different reasons, but also proud of us for the strength we've shown. Mom would have loved our children, I said, emotion clogging my throat. She really would have, Vivian agreed, and for a few minutes we shared memories, grieved together for the family we'd lost and the relationship we'd damaged, but were slowly trying to rebuild. These moments of grace, with Vivian, feel like gifts, unexpected and precious. They don't erase the past, but they offer possibility for a different future. And that's more than I ever hoped for during the darkest days of the scandal. Elise is 12 now, Harrison is 10, and they're growing into remarkable people. Elise has her father's strategic mind and my empathy, a combination that makes her a natural leader. She's already talking about wanting to expand the shelter program when she's older, to help more women in more cities. Harrison has his father's quiet intensity and my love of beauty, spending hours in the garden creating art from flowers and natural materials. Watching them, I feel overwhelming gratitude for this life we've built. It wasn't easy, wasn't simple, required sacrifices and courage and a willingness to face judgment. But it's ours, authentically and completely ours. Killian and I have been together now for over 13 years, married for 11. We've weathered every storm, survived every challenge, grown together rather than apart. Our love has evolved from that first desperate attraction into something deeper and more complex. a partnership built on respect and understanding and genuine affection. Do you ever regret it? I asked him on our 10th anniversary as we walked through the gardens at sunset. All the difficulty, the scandal, the battles we've had to fight? He stopped walking and turned to face me, his hands coming up to frame my face in that gesture that's become so familiar over the years. Not for a single second, he said with absolute certainty. Every hard moment, every sacrifice, every fight was worth it for this. For you, for our children, for the life we've created. I'd do it all again, Callista. I'd choose you every single time. And that's the truth I want to share with anyone who hears this story. Love, real love, isn't easy. It doesn't follow convenient timelines or socially acceptable patterns. Sometimes it requires difficult choices and the courage to face criticism. Sometimes it costs you reputation and comfort and the approval of people you care about. But when you find something real, something that makes you whole, something that lets you be your authentic self, that's worth fighting for. That's worth the scandal and the struggle and the sacrifice. I was invisible once, but through being seen by Killian and learning to see myself, I've become someone I'm proud of. I've built a legacy through the shelter work that will outlast any scandal. I've raised children who know their worth and aren't afraid to stand up for what they believe in. I've loved and been loved in a way that's transformed me completely. And yes, there are still people who judge us. There are still whispers at certain events, still occasional articles that bring up the scandal when they want to discuss our family. But we've learned to hold our heads high, to know our truth regardless of what others believe, to find strength in each other and in the life we've built. This morning, I was in the garden with Elise and Harrison, teaching them about the different varieties of roses, when Killian came out to join us. He looked at the three of us, covered in dirt and laughing, and his eyes filled with tears. "What?" I asked, concerned. "Just this," he said, gesturing to encompass all of us. "I never knew I could have this. A family, real love, genuine happiness. Before you, I thought my life was about power and duty and living up to expectations. You showed me there was another way." Elise hugged her father, dirt-covered hands and all, and said, "We love you, Daddy, even when you get all mushy like this." Harrison joined the hug, and then so did I, and we stood there in the rose garden, a family built from scandal and sacrifice and the courage to choose love over everything else. Because being seen, truly seen, by someone who loves all of you, that's worth everything. And learning to see yourself with that same love and acceptance, that's freedom. I am Callista Ashford, and this is my truth. I deserve to be seen, to be loved, to take up space in this world. And so do you. We all deserve that recognition, that validation, that knowledge that we matter. Find someone who sees you. But more importantly, learn to see yourself. That's where real power lives, where real transformation happens, where real love begins. And once you find it, fight like hell to keep it, because it's worth it. You're worth it, always.